Hello, and thank you for joining us today in our studies of Second Kings. Today we're in Second Kings chapter 10, and we're continuing our discussion of Jehu and his time on the throne and the things that he does when it comes to the kingdom of Israel. Jehu is really going to serve as a very violent and uh, difficult king to really be able to put our finger on. Because on the one hand, he is going to completely wipe out the family of Ahab. He is even going to go through and wipe out any of the worshippers of Baal that are found still in the northern kingdom of Israel. He is going to do everything that he does by an extremely violent means. And at the same time, he's going to fulfill the prophecies of God, and he is going to remove those things which are wicked and evil, and which Ahab and Jezebel had established in order to be able to set up their kingdom and to set up things the way they wanted. Remember, in the days of Elijah, back at the end of First Kings, if you were a prophet of God, your life was in constant danger from Ahab and Jezebel because they were trying to do the same thing to the servants of God. And so you have kind of this civil war between the servants of God and the servants of Baal in the northern kingdom. Jehu is going to wipe out the worship of Baal from the northern kingdom. But at the same time, we see the limitations of Jehu, and I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit, I know, but let's talk about what we see with Jehu here in chapter 10. As you begin chapter 10, you see the statements concerning Ahab's 70 sons. Now, these 70 sons, we normally think of sons as being direct children, as far as that goes. That this would be the next generation of Ahab. And yet, the term used in the Hebrew doesn't just denote the children, but rather it is also one representative of descendants. And with the amount of time that has passed and that has gone by, it is quite likely that these 70 sons would have included children and grandchildren, and it is even possible that they would have included great grandchildren as well at this particular juncture. And so you have a set of circumstances in which we're not just talking about one generation, but rather we're talking about multiple generations throughout Samaria that are going to be impacted by Jehu's ordinance that is going to go out in the first part of the chapter. So Ahab's family has been going for quite some time. Remember back in chapter 9 when Joram and Ahaziah are going to be killed, that Joram is a son and Ahaziah is a grandson. And so these individuals have lived for a long enough period of time that even the grandsons have reached adulthood and that they are functioning in that capacity. So here you have Jehu calling out for these 70 sons to be killed, and they will be. But here also you see, as we've already mentioned, the removal of the observance of Baal. And, there was a time in the days of Ahab when God tells Elijah that I have 7,000 who have not yet bowed the knee to Baal. Obviously, at this juncture, once Ahab is dead, things shift back to being more of worship toward God than worship toward Baal. But at the same time, there are still many who are worshiping Baal in Israel at this time. You go to the temple of Baal that was constructed, and it's talked about how that people are standing in there shoulder to shoulder to the point that the room is absolutely filled to capacity. There are many Baal worshippers in Israel. And yet Jehu is going to destroy each and every one of them with the help of Jehonadab. This is going to be Jehu fulfilling what he sees as his mission. And yet, at the same time, Jehu only takes it so far. It would be one thing if Jehu had gone back and he had completely restructured and reset the worship of God in the northern kingdom of Israel, and he had gone through and he had completely turned the hearts of the people back toward God. And yet, that's not what he does. Jehu's limitations are he is only willing to go so far as removing Baal worship. He continues in the ways of Jeroboam. He is going to continue with the worship of the two idols that Jeroboam placed in the north and the south of the kingdom of Israel. He is not going to remove the fallacies and the problems that Jeroboam put into place when it comes to the people's relationship with God. And so while Jehu is, as far as his relationship in doing God's will is concerned, he is one of the closest when it comes to rejecting Baal, when it comes to following through with the promises of God, when it comes to all of these different things. Jehu is not a servant of God from the standpoint of him being obedient to God. He took the power for himself, and he did what he could do and what he wanted to do in order to fully coalesce that power around himself. He's going to reign for 28 years, the end of chapter 10 tells us. But he is not going to be obedient to God. He is not going to be a godly king. As a result of that, God talks about at the end of chapter 10 how that he is going to utilize Hazael, the king of Syria, to continue to cause problems for the people of Israel and to continue to give land over to the Syrians because of the actions of Jehu. While Jehu is going to fulfill prophecy, while Jehu is going to remove one idol, he is going to retain another. There are some people that believe that as long that the enemy of the enemy is my friend. And while there may be a sense in which that is true, the enemy of my enemy only goes so far as when they stop being my enemy. Jehu is not willing to stop being the enemy of God. He is not willing to stop doing what God has condemned in order to do what God has said. And because of that, Jehu is still going to fall short of what he is supposed to be, what God expects him to do, and of truly being an obedient king. These are some of the things that I have seen in 2 Kings chapter 10. Jehu is a very complex character to discuss here in this chapter or in these chapters, because on the one hand he does fulfill the promises of God, but on the other hand he is not a servant of God. And so we need to be careful when we examine Jehu, because it is easy for us to look at things and say, well, Jehu was obedient. Well, Jehu was obedient to what he wanted to do, and he did it the way he wanted to do it. And that's what we see in Jehu. Next time we will come back and we will begin looking at 2 Kings chapter 11. And I hope that you'll join us then. But until then, have a great day.